Welcome to my channel. It's me, and this is another story from my town. I have an Airbnb now. I decided that when the pandemic hit and everybody was canceling their trips, I could put my house on the rental market. So far, it's been a great success. I get good reviews, lots of repeat customers, and even some famous people have rented my place. However, one particular customer really stands out in my memory. It was the fall of 2020, and the entire country was just shutting down. There was no vaccine, and nobody knew what was going to happen. My wife and I decided to take the plunge and list our home on Airbnb. We were excited and nervous at the same time. What if nobody wanted to stay there? What if we got bad reviews? We had so many questions, and then out of nowhere, we got a booking for 2 nights. I couldn't believe it. I was so excited. I immediately started preparing for our first guest. I cleaned the house, checked the Wi-Fi, bought some groceries, and made sure everything was perfect. Then I waited. The day before they were supposed to arrive, I got a message from the guest. He introduced himself as David. He asked if I had a physical copy of the key, or if I would prefer a lockbox. I told him I had a lockbox, and he said that was perfect. And then he asked if I had a guest book. I was confused. Why would a couple in their early 30s need to sign a guest book? I told him I didn't have one, but I could get one. He said not to worry about it, and that he would bring one. The next day came around, and we got the all clear. They arrived right on time, dropped off their bags, and headed out to explore the town. The whole time I was thinking about that guest book. Was it some kind of joke? Was it a prank? I had no idea. They came back later that evening, ordered some pizza, and went to bed. The next morning they left early, didn't have breakfast, and headed out again to go exploring. When they returned that night, we talked a little bit, and they seemed like a nice couple. They said they loved the house and the location, and that they couldn't wait to come back and visit again soon. They paid their remaining balance and headed out once more. I waited until they drove off before I went to the lockbox to get the key. That's when I noticed something weird. They left this big black bag in the entryway. I opened it up and found a thick, almost brand new leather guest book. I flipped it open and began to look through it. All of the pages were filled with names, but something was wrong. All of the names were also the names of the gravestones in our local cemetery. I immediately ran outside to check the dates. The very first entry in the guest book was from October of 1968. The newest one was from November of 1983. The oldest gravestone in the cemetery was from October of 1964, and the most recent was from November of 1982. Every single entry in the book matched a gravestone, and every single gravestone matched an entry in the book. There was even a message written in the front. It read, "We couldn't get a reservation anywhere else, so we thought we'd try your place. Hope you don't mind. Love, the ghost of Hillside Cemetery." I don't know how they did it. Maybe they took rubbings of the stones, but it was uncanny. This was definitely not a prank. Whoever these people were, they were serious. And then it hit me. The dates of the gravestones and the entries in the book were completely different. Most of the gravestones were from the 1800s, and the entries were from the 1960s and 70s. Some of them were even from the early 1900s. The message in the front of the book was from the 1980s. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a message. To this day, I don't know what it means or who wrote it. I kept the book and put it in the entryway. Maybe it's some kind of curse. Maybe it's a blessing. Who knows? All I know is that I hope whoever was trying to contact me through the guest book is happy now. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please feel free to check out more stories from my channel.
What do you think is the strangest thing you've ever seen while house sitting? Let me tell you about the strangest thing that happened to me. It was 2016, and I was working for a company that managed vacation rentals. We had this property in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. It was a beautiful little cabin. It was up the hill. It was very private. You had a fire pit outside, hot tub, all the amenities. And we had this one guest who booked the cabin, and he wanted me to go over and do a check-in for him. So I drove up there, did the check-in, and everything was fine. But what was different about this particular property is that they had a guest book. And typically when you have a guest book, it's usually just like a little thin book where people can sign in and leave comments about their stay. Well, this one was different. It was probably close to 3 or 4 inches thick. And I opened it up and started reading through it, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Every single page in this book had a name. And it wasn't just a name, it was a name and a date. And then underneath it, it would say something like, "Had a wonderful stay. Would recommend to friends and family. Thanks for everything." And then the next page, another name and another date and a nice comment. And then the next page, another name and another date. And this went on for hundreds and hundreds of pages. Now, I'm looking through this book and I'm thinking to myself, how in the world does this property get so many guests that they have to keep a multi-year, multi-hundred-page guest book? And I'm looking at these names and they're all real. Like obviously if it was a fake name, I could probably assume that the owner was just going through and making up names to make it seem like they had more guests than they actually did. But no, these were clearly real names. So I asked the owner, I said, "Hey, how is it that you have so many guests that you need to keep a 4-inch guest book?" And he said, "Oh, that's not a guest book." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "That's not a guest book. That's an obituaries book." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "All those names in there. That's everyone who's stayed here since we bought this place. And they're also the names of people who are buried in the cemetery behind my property." And I looked at him confused, and I'm like, "So let me get it straight. People are staying in your cabin, and then they re-dying, and then they re-getting buried in the backyard?" And he says, No. They re-staying in the cabin, and then they die, and then they get buried in the front yard." And then he says, "Why don't you come see it?" So we walk out the back door, and we go down this little hill, and it takes us to this small little cemetery. And I look at the headstones, and sure enough, all the names match the names that were in the book. And it hit me. This guy was renting out his haunted cabin on Airbnb. Now, I don't know if he was trying to hide it or he didn't know that was a thing or if he thought it added character to his property. But he was definitely renting out his haunted cabin on Airbnb. I ended up telling my boss about it, and we took it down and we refunded the guy. But yeah, I'll never forget that moment when I opened up that guest book and realized that every single person who stayed at this cabin ended up dying and being buried in the backyard. Let me know if you've ever had a strange experience like that. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and I will see you for a new story.
Hey guys, welcome to my channel. And today we have another scary story from our subscribers. This one comes from a user. So let's begin. It was about 2 a.m. and I was awoken in my bed to what I thought was my name being called. I sat up and turned to see a woman in a maid S uniform standing at the foot of my bed, staring directly at me. I was immediately confused because I didn't recognize the woman, and I knew that I didn't say anything out loud. It wasn't even a particularly common name. I sat there for a moment just staring at her, and she didn't say anything. She just kept staring at me. After a few moments, probably about 10 seconds. I started to get a little freaked out. I grabbed my phone and turned the light on, and the woman flinched as if she was startled by the sudden bright light. That's when I noticed how pale her face was. She looked like she hadn't seen the sun in a long time. Her skin almost looked gray. The creepiest thing about it all was that she didn't seem to be doing anything other than standing there. She wasn't dusting or cleaning or doing any kind of work that a maid would normally do. She was just standing there. I asked her, "Can I help you?" And she still didn't speak. She just stared at me. I told her that I didn't know who she was and that I wanted her to leave. She still didn't respond. She just stood there motionless. At this point, I was getting pretty scared, and I got out of bed and walked towards the door with the intention of leaving the room and going to a different one. As I walked past the woman, I could feel her eyes boring into my skull. I could also smell a very faint but sweet smell coming from her, something like vanilla or almond. As I opened the door to leave, I could hear footsteps coming down the hallway. I quickly peeked back into the room to make sure that the woman was still there, which she was, and then I closed the door and went to the front desk to report what was going on. I told the lady at the front desk that there was a woman in a maid-s uniform in my room, and that I was pretty sure that I was supposed to pay extra for that service. She laughed and said that it wasn't possible. I insisted that I must have heard her right, because there was no way that I misheard the word housekeeping. She told me to go back to my room and wait 10 minutes, and then she'll send someone up to check it out. I decided to go back to my room and wait for someone to come and deal with the situation, instead of trying to convince the front desk lady that there was a problem. When I got back to my room, I sat on the bed and waited. After about 5 minutes, I heard some commotion outside the door, voices and footsteps. Then the door opened and 2 men walked in, both wearing the same uniform as the front desk lady. I told them about the woman, and they both laughed and said something along the lines of, "Don't worry, mate. You know how these old buildings are. The walls are so thin you can hear everything." They said that they were going to investigate the noise outside the room and left the room without saying anything else. I didn't see either of the men or the woman for the rest of my stay, but I did hear some shuffling sounds and muffled voices coming from behind the wall next to my room throughout the night. The next morning after, of course, not sleeping at all, I checked out and left. Now, the reason I'm writing this is because I recently found out that the hotel I stayed in doesn't have housekeepers. In fact, they haven't had any since January of last year. Also, I'm pretty sure that there's no one staying in the room next to mine. I wonder if maybe I did just mishear it, and that it was actually a woman in the room next to me, having some kind of a nightmare or something. I don't know. Either way, it was really freaky. So that was the story of the housekeeper who didn't work there. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more content. Thanks for watching. See you next time.